Okay, thank you very much for your introduction and thank you for the invitation. I am very happy that I shall be able to introduce Stanisław Wyspiański to you at this symposium. Wyspiański owns quite a unique position in Polish culture, which rests equally on his contribution to literature and to the visual arts. He was a prolific playwright, a poet. He wrote nearly 20 plays, and his contribution to decorative arts was very varied. He apart from stained glass and murals, he revived the book design. It stands out, I think, among Polish and European artists of the time. Wyspiański's lifespan was very short. He lived only for 38 years. But during that time, he managed to produce many works and left an impressive legacy, both of works completed and of projects remaining only on paper. In his native Cracow, he experienced often the lack of understanding and sometimes even venomous criticism. His engagement with Art Nouveau style, for example, was dismissed by one of his critics as, I quote, "The artist is obstinately in love with serpentine lines and shapes that are twisted and tangled," unquote. On the other hand, it was the steadfast support of his friends, dedicated friends and patrons, and many of them, interestingly, were doctors and artists, that enabled him to put some of his very bold ideas into life. There are references recurring in his writings and decorative schemes that make his entire oeuvre intricately interconnected. This is also the case with the interior decorations of the House of the Medical Society of Cracow, which are the subject of this presentation, which can be properly understood and highlighted only in a broader context of Wyspiański's other literary and decorative works. As an artist, Wyspiański was a man of his time, versatile, multi-talented, expressing himself in different media, dedicated to the unity of arts and to the Wagnerian concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, exploring the artistic potential of crafts and interested in the preservation and restoration of old buildings. He was a skilled draftsman and a designer of stained glass windows and murals, stage sets and costumes, and interiors, public and private, which you can see here. Oops, sorry, do I do it right? Yes, this is the living room of the Żeleńskis family. This is the interior, in a period photograph, a conference room of the House of the Medical Society. And the one below is the exhibition room for the association of the Polish artists called Sztuka Art. All of these are from 1904. One of his most consistent contributions was to the revival of Polish book design and typography. On a more monumental scale, he is known for his cartoons for stained glass and windows, some completed, some never realized. Among those that were realized, his stained glass windows in the Franciscan Church in Cracow are among the best of their time, compelling in their iconography and superb execution. Though he was widely traveled around Europe, his short life and his work are associated with Cracow, the city in which he was born on the 15th of January, 1869, and in which he died almost exactly 112 years ago. Yesterday was the anniversary of his death on the 28th of November, 1907. For those of you who may have never been to Cracow, I have to insert here a footnote on its position in Polish history and the role it played in the 19th century. Cracow was the historic seat of Polish kings and until the mid-16th century, the capital of the Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania. The heart of the city is the Wawel Hill, with the royal castle and the cathedral, in which the kings were crowned and buried. In Wyspiański's lifetime, the Commonwealth didn't exist on the map of Europe after it had been partitioned and annexed in the late 18th century by its neighbors Russia, Austria, and Prussia. Cracow and the southeastern lands were under the rule of the Habsburgs, who transformed the royal Wawel castle into barracks for Austrian soldiers. For Wyspiański, the castle and the cathedral on the Wawel Hill were the repository of Polish history and tradition, and one of references which lay at the heart of his work. Wyspiański's attitude to the tradition was both reverential and, as I will try to show, also iconoclastic. He drew inspiration from the national history and myths, and at the same time he was audacious enough to challenge them in the spirit of modernity. In 1905, when the royal castle was to be restored to its residential function, Wyspiański proposed the transformation of the Wawel Hill into a Polish acropolis, that would host, apart from the already existing buildings, the nation's major political and cultural institutions. He believed that Polish national life lay dormant in its past and needed to be reinvigorated with a new spirit of modernity. The first formative influence on Wyspiański was that of his father, who was a sculptor and who had his studio at the foot of the Wawel Hill, it's more or less here, in Kanonicza Street. As a child, Wyspiański would spend a lot of his time there among busts and statues of historical figures from the Polish past, molded in clay or sculpted in lime wood. He later recalled this experience in one of his poems, and I quote it in literal translation. At the foot of the Wawel Hill, my father had a studio, a spacious chamber, vaulted and whitewashed, which was peopled with a huge crowd of figures from the past. I used to go there as a small boy, and what I felt, I later shaped into my art. His father was also part of the artistic community of Cracow, and among his colleagues were historical painters and draftsmen. Among them was a realist painter, Jan Matejko, who was later to become a mentor and teacher to his son. Matejko's huge canvases illustrating Polish history, such as this one showing Nicolaus Copernicus and his observatory, weighed heavily on Wyspiański's imagination. Matejko was also instrumental in securing Wyspiański's first commission, when he invited his then student to assist him in the restoration of the old murals in the Gothic Church of Our Lady in Cracow. Parallel to his studies at the Academy of Fine Arts in Cracow, Wyspiański also enrolled at the Department of Philosophy of the Jagiellonian University, where he attended, among others, lectures on art history and history of the ancient antiquity. Wyspiański's lifelong interest in history and philosophy was fueled very early, and not only in his father's studio. As a child, he witnessed a major personal bereavement when he was orphaned by his mother at the age of 7. He went to live with his relatives, who were well-educated people and had an impressive library. And it was in the cultivated atmosphere of their house that Wyspiański became engrossed in readings of classical authors, history and philosophy. His fascination with ancient drama and architecture would surface later, both in his plays and his designs. In 1890, Wyspiański embarked on his grand tour, his first major European trip that lasted 7 months. He visited northern Italy, Switzerland, France, Bohemia. It was a voyage of discovery during which he admired both the old masters as well as contemporary painters, and he went through the route of great French cathedrals. He visited Chartres, Amiens, and others. 4 years later, in his oil painting of the interior of Saint-Étienne Church in Paris, a large stained glass window is represented as a luminous flood of patches of bright colors, as if indiscriminately laid out on canvas. The focus is here on the overall effect rather than the antiquarian rendering of some historical details and features. The trip offered Wyspiański a chance to experience firsthand the great artistic legacy of European art and architecture, as well as to witness the current developments in arts. On return, like a score of other European painters at the time, he decided to pursue his studies in Paris, where he joined Académie Colarossi. One of the things he took from Paris from Cracow to Paris was a peasant's scarf. You can see it here, which is represented in this painting of his studio in Paris. His studies lasted altogether 4 years, from 1891 to 1894. What Goethe wrote about knowing foreign languages, and I quote, "Those who know nothing of foreign languages know nothing of their own," unquote, can be used to characterize most aptly Wyspiański's own experience. The years of studies, traveling, and exposure to art and architecture abroad enhanced his sense and understanding of culture and traditions in which he grew up, and on return he grounded himself in Cracow. In 1895, he received his major commission, which was for murals in the chancel of the Franciscan Church in Cracow. That's the church I've already shown. And later he received also a commission for the stained glass in the church, and the result was what is now considered his opus magnum in visual arts. Wyspiański's decorations are a celebration of vegetal life and forces of nature. The figures in the decorations are embedded into the theater of plants, and the decorations of the interior are a powerful hymn to the forces of creation. And interestingly, this refers also to what has been said by François Aubry in the morning. This flower is chicory, and this is a very popular flower in Cracovian area, so it's using local flowers. Yet another area of his prolific activities was portrait painting and drawing. He made a number of portraits of friends. I've missed just a note that he was, in the last decade of his life, he was very active, not only as an artist, but institutionally. He joined the Society of the Polish artists Sztuka Art, and he also in the same year joined the Vienna Secession. Polish artists had natural links with Vienna, as Cracow was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire then. As I've said, another area of his activity were portraits, and he made a number of them of friends, relatives, and patrons. This is Jan Stanisławski, he was a painter. This is Józef Raczyński, he was a doctor who studied research on the beneficial impact of sunlight for the prevention of rickets in children. And Julian Nowakowski, the central figure, was one of Wyspiański's most dedicated friends, and as a president of the Medical Society in Cracow, he was responsible for securing Wyspiański's commission for the design of its newly built house. The work on the decorations of the house started in 1904. It was a breakthrough year for the Cracovians, as the Austrian soldiers based in the royal castle were leaving, and the debate already started on the redevelopment of the Wawel Hill that I have mentioned. In his project for the Polish Acropolis, Wyspiański proposed that the past should be revisited and the seat of the Polish kings transformed into a new center of cultural and political life. The philosophical underpinnings of his idea, however, were much more radical and expressed in his play Acropolis, published in the same year, 1904. The action of Acropolis takes place on the Wawel Hill on the night of the resurrection, and its plot is central for the interpretation of the decorative scheme of the House of the Medical Society. In the first two acts, the figures of Polish kings from the tombs in the cathedral and the characters from Iliad represented in the 16th century textiles that decorate the walls of the castle are brought to life. In the last act, the cathedral is filled with a tune heralding the imminent recovery of independence, and at the dawn, the ancient god Apollo arrives in a golden chariot to install a new order. In Wyspiański's vision, Apollo is equivalent to Christ, the Redeemer, both the source of light and of healing and salvation. The symbolism of the interior decoration of the house was guided by its function. Since the patron of the medical society was Copernicus, the interior was designed to highlight the relationship between Cracow medicine and the heliocentric theory. The central feature of the staircase, which itself was painted yellow, is the stained glass window, Apollo, the Copernican system. In the figure of Apollo, Wyspiański combined his roles as a god of the sun and a patron of healing. The wrought iron railing, which you can see here, with lily flowers, together with the chestnut flowers painted in the frieze here, enhanced the symbolism of light. The columns in the staircase replicate the design of columns in Collegium Maius, the oldest college of the Jagiellonian University in Cracow, where Copernicus was a student. Apollo, as the god of the sun and light, is a reference to Copernicus' treatise on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, and as a god of healing to the medical society itself. All the other planets revolve around the solar deity in a dynamic whirlwind motion. However, this is also Apollo with the lyre, hardly seen in the stained glass, but well seen here in this drawing. That is god of music and poetry and songs, who is represented here very differently from another representation of Apollo in Wyspiański's illustration to his own translation of Iliad. Apollo in the stained glass is in bondage, and his position is that of Christ in painting and in paintings and sculptures representing the scene of crucifixion. And Apollo is tied to his lyre, like Christ who is nailed to his cross. A question that arises: what may have been the source and reason for such imagery? One explanation is offered by the last scene of Acropolis, in which Apollo turns up as a Christ-like savior who abolishes the old order in the name of new radiance, spiritual and modern. Such an understanding would be compatible with Wyspiański's perception of Polish history. Further evidence comes from his earlier drawing of the head of Christ, which bears a striking resemblance to the positioning of Apollo's head in the sketch for the stained glass. Viewed from such a perspective, Apollo in the House of the Medical Society could be seen as a demiurge and healer, the creator and source of light. Wyspiański's experience of history, however, also seems to have been filtered through his experience of modern art and the quasi-heroic position it allocated to artists. Thus, on a more personal level, Apollo could be also perhaps seen as a symbolic statement on the position of an artist who, tied to his lyre, is in bondage of his art, either awaiting the moment when he will be able to release its healing and redeeming power, or as a Promethean figure suffering eternally for the gift of light that he had brought to humanity. Stylistically, the design of the central window marks a departure from the Wyspiański's earlier project. The panels are more angular and seem to be resonant of the manner employed by Koloman Moser in his Steinhof church in Vienna. Another likely iconographic reference for the composition of the central stained glass is a drawing by a Czech sculptor, Franciszek Bilek, published in an art magazine, Życie, when Wyspiański was its visual editor. In the drawing, the Earth is revolving around the sun, it's in fact moving into the universe, as if defying its gravitation and departing from the centrally positioned sun. Koloman Moser's later painting, The Light, from 1914, may serve as a good example of the same modern cult-like attitude to the sun and the belief in the life-giving powers of light. Wyspiański's interest in the figure of Apollo and his highly individual use of the solar symbolism in the house may have been enhanced by his philosophical and scientific interests and readings. Wyspiański knew well Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, and his recurring interest in the Apollonian element may have been connected with the book. On the other hand, he was also alert to scientific discoveries, and through his friendship with doctors, in all probability stayed well informed of the advances in medical sciences and current discoveries on the role of sunlight. To sum up what I've said so far, it seems fair to conclude that Wyspiański's iconography and symbolism in the House of the Medical Society in Cracow is rich and complex in its selection of sources and references, literary, philosophical, visual, and scientific. The work is drawing upon Wyspiański's impressive knowledge and readings of Polish history and European literature, especially ancient Greek authors. Wyspiański successfully fused Greek and Christian traditions with the history of Cracow and his alma mater, the Jagiellonian University. At the same time, stylistically, but also philosophically and ideologically, his inner decorations are modern and representative of the turn of the century's developments in art. Thank you very much.